John Glendale, a man built by hard work and a steadfast commitment to his family, navigated the familiar streets of his suburban neighborhood with a weary sigh. The day had been long, a relentless grind of spreadsheets, meetings, and the persistent hum of fluorescent lights. All he craved was the comforting embrace of his loved ones, a warm meal, and perhaps an hour of peace before the cycle began anew. As he turned the corner onto his street, a sense of tranquility began to settle over him, a temporary reprieve from the pressures of corporate life. He was almost home. That serenity was shattered the moment he pulled into his driveway. Standing defiantly in front of his car, arms crossed and face contorted into a mask of fury, was Karen, the notoriously overbearing president of the Homeowners Association. John knew her reputation. She was a whirlwind of petty grievances, a stickler for rules that often seemed arbitrary and vindictive. He'd tried to avoid direct confrontations with her, preferring to simply comply with the HOA's demands, no matter how unreasonable. But today, it seemed, avoiding the inevitable was no longer an option. Before John could even fully emerge from his vehicle, Karen launched into a tirade. Her voice, already naturally shrill, was amplified by rage, echoing through the quiet neighborhood. "You, Glendale, I've been waiting for you. I'm here to collect the money." Her words hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. John, initially taken aback by the sheer force of her outburst, struggled to understand what she was talking about. He hadn't received any notice of outstanding fees or violations. "Collect what money, Karen?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm and reasonable, a tactic he knew was often ineffective with her. "My taxes. You're going to pay my taxes. It's only fair. Everyone in this neighborhood needs to contribute, and you're going to start with me now. You're going to start paying my taxes starting today, or face the repercussions and suffer the consequences of your actions. You need to pay for them right now, or else you will go to jail and be locked up and be separated from your family." Karen's eyes were wide, almost manic. The request was so bizarre, so utterly detached from reality, that John initially thought he had misheard her. He looked around, wondering if this was some kind of elaborate prank, but Karen's unwavering gaze and the increasingly agitated tremble in her voice confirmed that she was being entirely serious. "Karen, I'm sorry, but I have no idea what you're talking about. Pay your taxes? That's ridiculous. I have my own family to support and my own taxes to pay. There is no reason why I have to pay for your taxes, and it is very weird and strange of you to expect that, and it is not fair at all to me," John stated, his patience starting to wear thin. This woman was clearly unhinged, and he felt a growing unease as he realized the depths of her delusion. He stepped back slightly, creating more space between them. He didn't want to escalate the situation, but he also wasn't going to be bullied or intimidated. Karen, fueled by his refusal, began to list a series of fabricated violations, accusations of unkempt lawns, misplaced garbage bins, and unauthorized modifications to his property. Each accusation was more outlandish than the last, clearly designed to justify her outrageous demand. "You think you can get away with this, Glendale? You think you can just ignore the rules and disrespect the HOA? Well, you're wrong. You're a menace to this community, and you haven't been following any of guidelines of HOA and need to be punished and fined, and you will be punished and fined unless you pay my taxes right now," she shrieked, her voice reaching a fever pitch. John knew he had to end this confrontation before it spiraled completely out of control. He decided that he would remove himself from the situation and go into his home and call the sheriff department on her. John knew Karen was unhinged, and he had to do what he can to remove himself from the situation. John calmly reiterated, Karen, I am not paying your taxes, and these accusations are completely false. I think you need to calm down." He turned to walk towards his front door, hoping to defuse the situation by removing himself from her immediate presence. But Karen, emboldened by what she perceived as weakness, blocked his path. "You're not going anywhere, Glendale. I'm not done with you yet. If you don't pay for my taxes right now, then I will not move, and you will be stuck here with me." Her eyes blazed with a frightening intensity. John realized then that he wasn't dealing with a simple disagreement or a misunderstanding. This was something far more volatile and unpredictable. He cautiously maneuvered around her, keeping a safe distance. He unlocked his front door and stepped inside, quickly closing and locking it behind him. Karen pounded on the door, her shouts growing increasingly frantic. "You can't hide from me, Glendale. I'm the president of this HOA. I have power, more power than you can imagine." Inside the relative safety of his home, John's heart pounded in his chest. He glanced at his wife and children, who were watching him from the living room with wide, frightened eyes. He offered them a reassuring smile, trying to project an image of calm despite the turmoil he felt inside. "Everything's going to be okay," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Just stay here." He retreated to his home office, away from the front door, and retrieved his cell phone. His hands shook as he dialed 911. He explained the situation to the dispatcher, his voice urgent but controlled. He described Karen's erratic behavior, her impossible demands, and her increasingly threatening demeanor, and how she wouldn't leave him alone. He emphasized that he felt concerned for his safety and the safety of his family. The dispatcher, recognizing the seriousness of the situation, assured him that officers were being dispatched to his location immediately. As he waited for the police to arrive, John peered through the blinds, watching Karen as she continued to rant and rave in his front yard. She was pacing back and forth, gesturing wildly and shouting obscenities. Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. They stood at a distance, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of curiosity and concern. John felt a surge of embarrassment, but also a sense of vindication. He wasn't the only one who recognized that Karen's behavior was completely out of line. The minutes crawled by, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, he saw the flashing lights of a police cruiser approaching. Relief washed over him. Help had arrived. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He knew that this confrontation would likely have lasting consequences, but he also knew that he had done the right thing. He had protected his family and stood up to someone who was abusing her power. The arrival of the police cruiser immediately shifted the atmosphere. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated Karen's face, highlighting the manic intensity in her eyes. Her ranting subsided, replaced by a nervous, almost theatrical, composure. She straightened her clothes, smoothed her hair, and attempted to adopt a more reasonable demeanor. Two officers emerged from the vehicle, their expressions neutral and professional. They approached John, who had stepped out of his house, to meet them. He quickly filled them in on the details of the situation, reiterating Karen's bizarre demand for him to pay her taxes and her subsequent barrage of fabricated HOA violations. He pointed to Karen, who was now standing silently, watching them with a mixture of defiance and apprehension. The officers approached Karen and began to question her. Initially, she attempted to downplay the situation, claiming that it was simply a misunderstanding, a minor disagreement over HOA regulations. But as the officers pressed her, her story began to unravel. She contradicted herself, her voice trembling, her eyes darting nervously. One of the officers, a seasoned veteran with years of experience dealing with all types of people, recognized the signs of someone who was not in their right state of mind. He discreetly signaled to his partner, who nodded in understanding. They separated Karen from John, leading her away from the immediate vicinity of his property to a more neutral location on the sidewalk. As they spoke to her, the officers noticed several inconsistencies in her behavior. She was fidgeting, her speech was slurred, and she seemed to be having trouble focusing. They asked her if she had been drinking or taking any medication, to which she vehemently denied. But her denials lacked conviction, and the officers remained suspicious. Meanwhile, the other officers spoke to several of the neighbors who had witnessed the confrontation. Their accounts corroborated John's story, painting a picture of Karen as an unstable and overbearing individual who had been harassing him without justification. The neighbors expressed their relief that the police had arrived, stating that Karen's behavior had become increasingly erratic in recent weeks. After gathering all the necessary information, the officers conferred privately. It was clear to them that Karen's behavior was not simply the result of a heated argument. Something else was going on. They decided that they needed to take her into custody for further evaluation. When the police informed Karen that she was being detained, her carefully constructed facade crumbled. She erupted in a torrent of anger and outrage, accusing the officers of bias and abuse of power. "You can't do this to me. I'm the president of the HOA. I have connections. You'll regret this," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. The officers, unfazed by her outburst, calmly explained that they had reasonable suspicion to believe that she was a danger to herself and others. They reiterated their concerns about her erratic behavior and her potential impairment. They informed her that she would be taken to the police station for questioning and a medical evaluation. As the reality of her situation sunk in, Karen's anger turned to desperation. She pleaded with the officers, promising to cooperate, to be reasonable, to do anything they asked if they would just let her go. She claimed that she had simply been stressed and overwhelmed, that she hadn't meant to cause any harm. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The officers attempted to handcuff her, but she resisted, struggling against their grip. They were forced to use minimal force to subdue her, securing the handcuffs and escorting her towards the police cruiser. As they led her away, she turned to John, her eyes filled with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "This isn't over, Glendale. You'll pay for this. I promise you, you'll regret the day you crossed me." John watched as Karen was placed in the back of the police cruiser, the doors slamming shut with a resounding thud. A wave of relief washed over him, but it was tempered by a sense of unease. He knew that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult process. He had filed a formal complaint against Karen, and he was prepared to cooperate fully with the police investigation. The police cruiser pulled away from his curb, its flashing lights fading into the distance. The gathered neighbors began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves about the dramatic events that had just unfolded. John turned to his wife and children, who were still watching him from the front door. He wrapped his arms around them, holding them close. "It's over," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "For now, it's over." At the police station, Karen's behavior continued to deteriorate. She refused to cooperate with the officers, becoming increasingly agitated and belligerent. She demanded to speak to her lawyer, but refused to provide any contact information. She insisted that she was being framed, that John Glendale was the one who was out of control, that he had been harassing her for months. Due to her erratic behavior and the suspicion of impairment, the police requested a drug test. Karen initially refused, but after being informed that her refusal would be considered an admission of guilt, she reluctantly complied. The results of the drug test came back positive for methamphetamine. The revelation that Karen was under the influence of drugs at the time of the confrontation explained a great deal. It accounted for her irrational behavior, her delusions of grandeur, and her complete lack of self-control. It also painted a far more complex picture of the situation, one that transcended the boundaries of a simple neighborhood dispute. Armed with this new information, the police questioned Karen again. This time, she was more subdued, more vulnerable. The drugs were wearing off, and the reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She admitted to using methamphetamine on a regular basis, claiming that it helped her cope with the pressures of her job and the demands of her position as HOA president. She confessed to fabricating the HOA violations against John Glendale, admitting that she had been targeting him because she resented his success and envied his family. She acknowledged that her demand for him to pay her taxes was completely irrational, a product of her drug-fueled paranoia. As Karen's story unfolded, the police learned that her life was in shambles. She had been secretly struggling with addiction for years, hiding her problem from her family and friends. Her job was in jeopardy. She was facing financial difficulties, and her relationships were strained. The pressure had finally become too much to bear, leading her to a point of complete breakdown. Karen was charged with several offenses, including public intoxication, resisting arrest, and making false accusations. She was also suspended from her position as HOA president and faced the possibility of losing her job. The news of her arrest and her drug use spread quickly through the community, shocking and dismaying her neighbors. The HOA held an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. They voted to permanently remove Karen from her position and appointed a new president who was known for their fairness and impartiality. The new president immediately began to address the grievances of the residents, implementing a more transparent and equitable system of governance. John Glendale, vindicated by the truth, received an apology from the HOA and a formal retraction of the fabricated violations. He was hailed as a hero by his neighbors, who admired his courage in standing up to Karen's abuse of power. He used the opportunity to speak out against the dangers of addiction and the importance of supporting those who are struggling. Karen, stripped of her power and facing the consequences of her actions, was sentenced to a period of rehabilitation and probation. She lost her job, which was very devastating to her. She was then sent off to jail. She realized the depths of her mistakes and committed to turning her life around. She received treatment for her addiction, underwent therapy, and began to rebuild her relationships with her family and friends. The events surrounding Karen's meltdown served as a wake-up call for the community. It highlighted the importance of mental health awareness, the dangers of unchecked power, and the need for compassion and understanding. The community came together, organizing support groups, hosting educational events, and working to create a more inclusive and supportive environment for all its residents. John Glendale, deeply impacted by the experience, became an advocate for responsible governance and community engagement. He encouraged his neighbors to get involved in the HOA, to voice their concerns, and to hold their leaders accountable. He believed that by working together, they could prevent similar situations from happening in the future. The community, scarred but not broken, began to heal. The experience fostered a sense of unity and resilience, strengthening the bonds between neighbors and creating a more just and equitable environment for all. John and his family were able to move on with their lives, knowing that they had played a part in making their community a better place. Though the memory of Karen's meltdown would linger, it would serve as a reminder of the importance of vigilance, compassion, and the unwavering pursuit of justice.